So what do you get when you put Conor McGregor in an acting role? Well, a fighter that can't really act, but luckily enough this film shined in the areas where McGregor was probably able to thrive, the fight scenes. Focusing on a roadhouse that was facing threats from the Brandt family who wanted to tear it down so that they could continue developing Glass Key and making money off the land. Elwood Dalton, a former UFC fighter, was brought in to stop the threats that the owner Frankie was facing there every night. With a story that does go to an unrealistic level of believability, let's jump into the video and break down all that there was to take away from it. Here is a review of Roadhouse and the ending explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. My review of the movie. So I personally think that if you take this film at face value, then it can be enjoyed for exactly what it is. I don't feel you're watching this sort of film for the depth of the story or quality of acting. You're watching this film for the extremely well choreographed fight scenes, the brutal moments and corny one-liners that often appear. And it very much feels like the story is built around that, rather than the fight scenes being integrated into the story. So in looking at the fight scenes, we were immersed straight into them with the opening section of the movie with Post Malone participating in some bare knuckle, and from the off it was choreographed really well. I'd actually say that even though Post Malone didn't have that much acting to do, he looked the part and played the part well. It was convincing enough for the brief cameo appearance that he had. The first 20 minutes sort of established the story that was in place. Dalton having this troubled past where he didn't really want to talk about what happened when he was in the octagon and what he did to his friend, but being a fighter that was essentially unbeatable. And we saw this building up in the first act. It peaked when we saw him take on the biker gang when he wiped them all out in a matter of seconds, something which was comedic but also great to look at. With regards to the fight scenes, they really did steal the movie, as it felt like there was one that was occurring almost every 10 minutes, which, like I said, is probably the main reason as to why you're watching the film. I liked the chaos that would be present in the bar, and the scene where Knox and Dalton were fighting, where it switched to a point of view perspective and camera angle. It was a really cool and creative approach that was taken. It's not often you get to look at Conor McGregor coming at you from the perspective of somebody that's taking punches, so it was immersive and it suited the scene really well. With regards to the story of the film, it was pretty bland and had every trope that you could possibly imagine. For example, the love interest, which felt really shoehorned in, with him needing to save her at the end. Plus her also being the daughter of somebody who was caught up in the life of crime and was a crooked cop. Plus, you also had the young kid that brought the main character down to earth and ultimately went on to help out in the end. Seeing as though this film was a reimagining of a 1980s film, it very much seemed like it had that present within it, because it probably wasn't done as much back then. One of my main issues with the story is that it just never really felt like any of the villains in the movie were up to the job and were a match for Dalton, so their success was never really a possibility. Whether it be the biker gang, Ben Brandt or Knox. Don't get me wrong, the fight with Knox at the end was brutal and Dalton was on the cusp of being killed, but it just felt like the whole thing about the roadhouse being shut down wasn't ever going to be possible. It was just getting smashed every night, which I just didn't really buy into. That fight scene at the end with Dalton and Knox was definitely one of the best moments though. The way that Dalton finished him off was just absolutely brutal and I didn't see it coming in the slightest. With regards to Jake Gyllenhaal, I thought he was probably actually one of the best things about this film. He was the perfect casting choice for it, and to be honest, Jake Gyllenhaal rarely ever misses with his performances, so I didn't really expect anything less. You bought into the troubled past of the character and the monster that was lying within if he ever did get pushed to the limit, and we did eventually see that monster coming to the forefront when he was pushed too far. Now, with Conor McGregor, thankfully he didn't have too many lines because some of the deliveries that he had just didn't really land at all. It felt like he had the same facial expression throughout the entirety of the film, and his lines didn't ever really go more than about 7 words. So in terms of buying into the character, it just didn't really happen. I feel like he was probably given the role to bring eyes to the movie that may not have ordinarily watched it. The colour palette in the film was something which was gorgeous though. It captured the feel of the environment that the film was set in, and the glossy, luminous purples, blues and greens are something that definitely sticks in my head when I think of the film. One thing that I thought was underrated though, and probably will be forgotten in the film, is the music. I thought the different bands being there and playing every time a fight scene would be occurring in the bar was a cool choice. It set the tone of the atmosphere, the feeling of the roadhouse, and it provided some kind of rhythm to the fights that were taking place. I actually can't believe that this film managed to stretch to a runtime of about 2 hours. It felt like it was only about an hour and a half, or it had a story that warranted an hour and a half, so that did surprise me. Personally, I don't think this is going to be a film that's going to be remembered, nor is it going to be one that people rate highly, because the fundamentals of a good film, such as the story and the performances, are just missing slightly. But in terms of fight scenes, that's something that will be memorable for it. If you're up for just a good fun film, then this is it. It's a let's throw it on during a Friday night type of movie, and if you do that, then I think you'll enjoy it for what it is. The one thing I did take away from it though was, who do you think would win in a fight out of Dalton and Reacher? That's a crossover I definitely didn't expect to be wanting before I put the film on. The ending explained. In terms of the ending of this film, we saw that Dalton was pushed to the limit when we saw that Charlie's bookshop was burnt down as a message to get him to leave the town. So with that being his final straw, he was told about a meeting that was taking place, and once Ellie's father told him that she'd been kidnapped, something which he knew was a ploy to just get him to go there, he ended up creating some kind of explosives with the intention of disrupting the meeting and showing that he's not going to be going anywhere. Once the explosion went off, he rescued Ellie, but she was taken by Ben Brandt on his boat. With Dalton then climbing onto the boat that Knox was on, he threw him out and went after Ben. Then, once they all ended up on the same boat, the boat ended up colliding with the roadhouse and ultimately destroyed it, which was kind of Ben's plan all along. However, in this moment, Dalton knocked out Ben, where he then thought he was safe. But he wasn't. Knox had taken a car and drove it into the roadhouse, and this is where we then saw the final fight taking place. One which included a shot that went behind the band's safety cage to almost resemble the fact that they could be inside of an octagon. This is where we then saw Dalton and Knox having a pretty even fight for the most part of it. But Dalton ended up getting pierced with a piece of wood. With it looking like he was gonna lose, he pulled it out of him and then proceeded to stab it into Knox several times in an attack that was just absolutely brutal. Oh, yeah, and something else that was brutal was when Knox killed Ben in a matter of seconds just because he wanted him to shut up. With Ellie's father arriving on the scene, he was now prepared to cover for Dalton because he rescued his daughter when she was actually kidnapped, and then we saw that Dalton was done in the town, having improved a lot of the people's lives that were there. He left the case filled with Ben's money inside of the bookshop for Charlie and her father so that they could pay for the repairs. Plus, the bar staff were now equipped with the skills to be able to fight off the trouble that kept arriving there. However, with the Brandts now out of the picture, that probably wouldn't really be needed anymore. I don't know whether he was over what he did to his friend in the octagon, or if he moved on from it, or if it was something that was just going to haunt him for the rest of his days. It was almost his way of knowing what he was capable of doing, and like he said at the start, no one ever wins in a fight, and he knew that. The fact that he took the people that he fought to hospital is something that I feel he did because he didn't want the burden of something happening to them being on his mind, like what happened to his friend. Hence why he continued to do that. It was only once he entered that dark part of his mind that he didn't care. Do I think there'll be a sequel to the movie? Personally, I don't think so. There was a post-credits scene where we saw that Conor McGregor's character Knox ended up surviving, somehow. I genuinely don't know how he did, because surely there's no surviving what he went through. But I can't see them making another one. It's kinda like a one and done thing. So, there you have it. Roadhouse ending explained and movie review.